Isaiah chapter 40, beginning in verse 28, Isaiah says, "Hast thou not known, hast thou not heard, that the everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, fainteth not, neither is weary. There is no searching of his understanding. He giveth power to the faint, and to them that have no might he increaseth strength. Even the youths shall faint and be weary, and the young men shall utterly fall. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and shall not faint." Certainly the issue of the text is strength, the kind of strength that upholds us. For those of you here this morning that are adequately strong, coping with all of life with no problems and no struggles, no difficulties, no doubts, no need of God and his strength and his direction, no need of any man, no need of Geritol, no need of vitamins, no need of anything. You're an island and a rock and you stand on your own. This is not for you. Those of you breathing, this is for you. If you think it's not for you, get the tape, save it. Put it somewhere where you'll be able to find it. You'll need it. Because Isaiah says the day comes in verse 30 when even those that are young, they faint, they're weary. Young men utterly fall. Youth ultimately fails, he says. The day will come. We keep breathing. Life changes. We go through the seasons that there are in life, and certainly they're wonderful. Solomon, the wisest man that ever lived, said, "Rejoice, O young man, in thy youth. Let thy heart cheer thee in the days of thy youth, and walk in the ways of thine heart, and in the sight of thine eyes. But know thou that for all of these things God will bring thee into judgment. Therefore, remove sorrow from thy heart." The idea is self-inflicted, doing things that are foolish and damaging. "Put away evil from thy flesh. Childhood and youth, they're vanity, they're fleeting. Remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth, while the evil days come not, nor the years draw nigh, when thou shalt say, I have no pleasure in them," the more difficult years in life. Youth, wonderful. A time of dreams, time of aspiration, a time of energy, vitality, a time when we're not afraid to take hold of a vision or of a challenge, certainly a time when our course so often is set, when our compass takes its direction, but so important for that to be by waiting upon the Lord, that he would give us the direction. Because in our youth, if we set our compass and it's only a degree off, it doesn't seem like much in our youth, but 50 years later of being 1 degree off will put you thousands of miles away from where you should be. But be young. It says, enjoy your youth. Don't anybody condemn you for that. Youth's a wonderful thing from what I remember. And there are seasons. Youth, middle age, denial, and old age. We live in an interesting culture, don't we? But if you're among those that are reaching out and saying, Lord, I need direction, I need wisdom, I need strength. If you're among those that are saying, life is going by, I want to know that I do this right, I only get to do it one time. Only get to be 20 once, never again. Only get to be 30 one time, never again. Only get to do this once. And Lord, I'm determined to rise early and seek you, or to spend more time in your word. I'm determined to complain less, but I find myself not making any progress. Oh, I'm determined, Lord, but I don't find in human energy any resource to really see the changes that I need to see. Well, Isaiah has something to say to us in regards to those heartfelt desires, because they're God-given. He says, youth will fail. Those days will go by quickly enough. And then we find ourselves changing perspective a bit, looking around a different way, watching our kids grow up, watching them move out, watching them move back in. And there is a weariness to life that can be there. There are times when we feel we're worn, like fainting. And Isaiah's challenge is to wait upon the Lord. Isaiah knew who he was waiting upon. I think that's important. In verse 12, in the same chapter, he said, who hath measured the waters, the seas, in the hollow of his hand? And he's meted out the heaven. He's measured out the heaven with the span. That's between your index finger and your thumb. That God has measured out the universe with the span of his hand, it says. And comprehends the dust of the earth in a measure. He weighs the mountains in scales and the hills in a balance. Again, when you go in the springtime after all the potholes and you get your tires aligned and balanced, they hammer those lead things on there so they spin smoothly. It says here, God has measured out the mountains with a balance, that he put the Mariana Trench where it is because we need a little more weight on that side. He stuck the Himalayas where they were, hammered them on to get it to spin nicely. That in his wisdom, that he's done what he's done. The oceans, 330 cubical million miles, nothing to him in the hollow of his hand. The universe laid out with his span, hundreds of billions of light years. He said, I'll make it this big. Verse 15, behold, the nations are as a drop of the bucket, and are counted as the small dust of the balance. Behold, he taketh up the isles, the continents, as a very little thing. As dust in the balance. In that day, you were a merchantman. You were selling. You put your weights on the scales. If you wanted to prove your honesty, you blew the dust off earth because you didn't even want someone to pay for dust. So as you got out your scales and your balances, you blew the dust off. And in that, just kind of an expression to let the buyer know that you're completely honest. But here it says, to God, the nations are as the dust in the scales, nothing to him in that sense. Verse 22, it is he that sitteth upon the circle of the earth, and the inhabitants thereof as grasshoppers. He stretches out the heavens as a curtain, spreads them as a tent to dwell in. The circle of the earth, long before Christopher Columbus tried to convince anybody the world was round, Isaiah knew, ancient Israel knew. And it took millennium for scientists to catch up, but the Bible knew. Job had said he hung the earth upon nothing. Job 26. He hung the earth upon nothing. And of course, anybody in that day knew that was stupid. It was Atlas that held up the world. And Atlas couldn't just, what was he on? Well, he was on a big tortoise, of course. What was the tortoise on? An elephant, of course. I don't know what was under the elephant. And as the millennia go by, we catch up to the Bible and find out that it's true. And it's also true in this sense, when we're faltering and failing in this life, and there are difficulties. The God that we wait upon is a God who stretched out the universe and its expanse, who balanced the solar systems and the earth in its rotation, who is not insecure about the problem in the world today. The nations raging, the Bible says. They're as dust in the balance to him. He doesn't grow weary and he doesn't faint. So when we are weary, and we do faint, we have to know who we're going to as a resource. They that wait upon the Lord. Now, that kind of waiting is not static. It's not just standing in line. That's the kind of waiting that just drives me nuts. And I have a whole repertoire of venting, frustrating expressions that help me during those times. When I'm in traffic, in a traffic jam, my wife has to listen to that. Oh, man, come on. What is going on? What that guy up there? What is, where did he get his license? At Pep Boy? Let's go. What's going on? My wife is now, calm down. But I find the same repertoire works well in a checkout stand in a supermarket. Oh, yeah. What are they? It's not called a checkout stand because you're supposed to use a check. What's going on here? I can't believe this. People must believe in reincarnation. They got all the time in the world. I need to get through this line, And I find the same repertoire works at home when one of the kids has been in the shower for 4.5 hours, Oh, yeah. What are they doing? That kind of waiting. You understand. It's not that kind of waiting. It's waiting upon the Lord. It's obedience. Waiting upon the Lord without obeying is contradictory. It's waiting upon the Lord for direction, for strength, for renewal. It's trusting, it's hoping, it's seeking. Waiting upon the Lord for your choices after high school, to wait upon Him, to seek Him. Choosing a spouse, a career, God's calling. In difficult days, when there's sickness and disease, when there's loss of children or of spouse or of parent, of friend, waiting upon the Lord. It says, they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. Interesting idea, to wait upon Him. Psalm 25, and many places in the Psalms, says, yea, let none that wait on Thee be ashamed. Again it says, for Thou art the God of my salvation, on Thee do I wait all the day. Again, the psalmist said, let integrity and uprightness preserve me, for I wait on Thee. The same word, to wait on the Lord. It's the Hebrew root means to twist together, to bind together, to take the strands of something and twist them together and thereby making it stronger, the way a rope was made. That's our word, wait here. In the difficulties, the heartaches of life, waiting upon the Lord is not static. Something is happening. Oh, there's the consolation of realizing His presence. There's the consolation of knowing His word. But it tells us here that God is doing something. And if God isn't doing something, we might as well all go home and not be here. He doesn't hold this out in front of us to frustrate us. He's the one who says to us that fathers should not provoke their children to wrath. He puts this in front of us because it's available. That if we wait upon Him, that the strands that are so often frayed in our life are twisted together and they're wound together with His own nature, with His own spirit. This is not just something physical, because it says that young men shall fail, that youth fails. It says of Moses before his death that Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was not dim and his natural forces were not abated. That wasn't his gene pool. He experienced that because he was a man that sought the Lord and waited upon the Lord. And it says at 120 years old, there was still a vibrancy. Certainly it was internal, but it affected his frame. Waiting upon the Lord, not just dependent on your intellect, not just dependent on you recognizing, and yet God is gracious to meet us in those places. But waiting upon the Lord puts us in a position where God does a supernatural work in our lives that is not dependent upon us. The resource of it is different. And he takes the frayed strands of our life and he binds them and twists them together with his own strength, his own perspective, his own truth, his very own life, the life of his Son given for us. They that wait upon the Lord, that's the idea. So important. They shall renew their strength. To renew, your translation might say change, or you might have a note in your gloss, but it's the word that means to abolish, to alter. It means to exchange one thing for another. They that wait upon the Lord in the difficulties of life, in the times of life when we're setting direction, in the time of life when we're making major decisions, in the times of life when the frame is failing and we need something from him. In that time when we are being bound together with him, as it were, it says our strength is being exchanged or abolished or altered. We're trading in natural human determination for grace at that time. Paul says in his struggle that he sought the Lord for something over a period of 12 times and even 3 times with fasting. And he said, I learned during that time that in my weakness his strength is made perfect, and I rather now rejoice in those times of difficulty, he said, because I discover something new of Christ that I would never have known. When we are being woven together with him, it is our strength, not his, that is being exchanged for something far deeper, far greater, far more enabling. What does that look like in the final analysis, he says, as it takes place? Well, he says 3 things about those who wait before the Lord, who receive that renewal, that exchange of human strength for his strength, human life for his life. It says 3 things. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Almost seems backwards. Seems it should be walk, run, then soar, like an eagle. But it starts the other way. They shall mount up on wings as eagles. They shall run and they shall walk. Certainly that's going from the uplifting hand of God to the more difficult circumstances of life, to the monotony of everyday walking with the Lord. Certainly it is going to the more difficult. They shall mount up on wings as eagles. I love eagles. Not ours here in Philly, but pray for them. The Bible has a number of things to say about eagles. I love to watch a Discovery Channel when there's something on about eagles. I'm mesmerized by eagles and some of the ability, some of the mystery of the animal. Years ago, wanting to do something on eagles, I called the Academy of Natural Sciences, and they said, no, you don't want to talk to us. Talk to this guy at the Hospital University of Pennsylvania Veterinary Medical School. And I called him. He said, no, you call this guy at the zoo. And I called the guy at the zoo and talked to him. He said, no, you want to talk to this guy at the Smithsonian. So I called the Smithsonian and talked to this guy. And the guy said, you want to talk to Dr. Clayton White at Brigham Young University. And he knows more about eagles than anybody except a mother eagle. So I called out there, and a guy got on the phone, talked to him for over an hour about eagles, about some of the verses in the Bible, and we had a great time, and the guy's raised eagles, and he's an eagle guy. And this allusion to mounting up on wings as eagles is the eagles in that part of the world would not be the eagles building their nest in a redwood or a huge spruce or fir, usually in a rocky crag, because that's the terrain. And those eagles will get up in the morning and they'll preen their wings with saliva, with their tongue. They'll go over their wings, smooth their feathers out. They stick together so that it lifts them, as it were. And as they're doing that, they're watching. They'll see a coney, a rat, some kind of varmint, quarter mile away, half mile away. They're thinking, I'm going to get that one. Just, preening their wings. Their resolution is incredible in their eyes. And they sit there until the sun warms up the rocks. And as soon as that rock begins to warm, there's an updraft right next to where they built their nest on the crag. And they don't even have to flap. They spread their wings and they step out and they soar. There's an updraft and they're taken up. Not by their own strength, not by their own resource. There are those in this room, we've experienced that, waiting upon the Lord in a difficult circumstance, seeking him for something. All of a sudden, he's lifting us up above the problems of earth, and when we get up high enough, our perspective changes. They come into focus with all of the other things. Life is seen in a bigger expanse. And we thank you, Lord, for lifting us up, letting us see. Mounting up on wings as eagles. Man, I could go on about eagles. Interesting how they get married. Major species of eagles, the female will swoop down as she has a suitor, a male following her, and take something off the ground and take it. He'll follow. She'll drop it. And then he'll swoop down and catch it before it hits the ground. If he catches it before it hits the ground, he can continue to pursue. She'll go down and get something heavier. There's probably an analogy somewhere, I'm not sure, but then she'll take that up and drop it. And after 2 or 3 of those, he has got to swoop down further. As he grabs it, he's got to flap, and then she decides he's a proper suitor. And then they'll soar. They'll go up to 10,000, 15,000 feet. And all of a sudden the male will swoop down on her back. And right before he hits her, she'll flip over midair and they lock talons. And then they'll fall screaming. Just screaming, both of them, for 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 feet. And when they release before they hit the ground, then they're married. And they'll stay with their partner for life. We do it the other way. We lock talons and then scream for the rest of our lives. They shall mount up on wings as eagles. There will be those days, it says, when we wait upon him, seeking him, asking him, Lord, speak to me. Give me direction here. Help me understand what to do. When the warmth will all of a sudden create an updraft and there's no labor then, we're able to step out and we're lifted up by God's grace, his direction. There will be other days when it says they shall run and not be weary. There are those days of running, storms of life, difficulties of life, the adrenaline rush. We're pressed, it seems, beyond measure. We exert ourselves, and it says that those who have been waiting upon the Lord will not be weary in those days. The writer to Hebrews says this, wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witness, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith. There are days of running the race for us. And if we try to run that race on our own, in our own strength, we find our failings. But looking unto Jesus is wait upon the Lord. Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. Let us run with patience the race that is set before us. Laying aside every weight and the sin that does so easily beset us. You've seen the Olympic runners, that they're stripped down to as least as possible, tight clothing. If the aerodynamics gives them one step on the other competitors, They're willing to strip down. What about us? Are we waiting on the Lord? And are we willing then to run the race, to let go of some of those things? The sins that so easily beset us is interesting. Campbell Morgan translates that, the sin in good standing. In fact, he translates sin in good standing around. That around us as Christians, there's those big bad sins. We know that, it's obvious we're not to live that way. And yet there are other things that the world holds out that are not expedient. They're not helpful to us in the race that we're running. Maybe they're not wrong in and of themselves, but they can end up to be a weight. But if we set ourselves to seek him, and we find our life being interwoven with his, and we're exchanging natural strength for the strength that he gives, then let us run with patience the race that is set before us. And we will not grow weary, Isaiah says. And those that walk, that's the most difficult of all. So daily, lifelong, walking the walk and not just talking the talk. Not wearied in the Christian walk. And we can be, because this is not our home. The Bible says we are sojourners and pilgrims, we're passing through. And we can find that every day of life can be wearing. The great apostle Paul said, "For this cause we faint not. Though our outward man perish, the young shall fail, yet the inward man is renewed day by day. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more exceeding eternal weight of glory, while we look not at the things that are seen, but at the things that are not seen, because the things that are seen are temporal, the things that are not seen are eternal, waiting upon the Lord." Sometimes we think of Paul the apostle kind of, again, like the Energizer Bunny, that when he got saved on the road to Damascus, the Lord appeared to him there, and his battery was charged up for life. It was such a heavenly, dramatic, powerful experience that he never looked back once. No, Paul here, as he begins 2 Corinthians, says that him and Silas despaired of life itself, pressed out of measure. Not, "I was thinking about suicide." He never said that. But he said life was so difficult, he said we would rather just go be with the Lord. Life was so difficult. We were pressed out of measure. And here he says, "But though the outward man is perishing, the inward man is renewed the same way you and I are renewed day by day." Not a month's supply, not a week's supply, day by day. That while we're waiting upon the Lord. While we look, not at the things that are seen, the things that are not seen. Because the things that are seen, they're temporary. The things that are not seen are eternal. We keep eternity before our hearts. Isaiah understood the same thing as he challenged his own generation. "Hast thou not known? Hast thou not heard that the everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, fainteth not, neither is weary?" And if he doesn't faint and he's not weary, then we can go to him when we are fainting and are weary. "There is no searching of his understanding. He giveth power to the faint. And to them that have no might he increaseth strength. Even the youths shall faint and be weary, and young men shall utterly fall. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and they shall not faint."